Thank you, Dr. Craig.
Talk forward then,
I
Tim.
know I need to move up. I need to be able to click there. That's why. Thank you for those lovely thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to continue the conversation we started in Toronto. For those of you who were at CoinGeek Toronto or watched the video, we had a conversation, Craig and I, about his creation of Bitcoin, the story behind that. This time I want to do something a little bit different, although I'm first going to ask you something I didn't ask you in Toronto, which is the choice of the Satoshi Nakamoto name. We did talk about it a bit, but I never asked you why you chose a Japanese name. And since we're here in Asia, not quite Japan, but in Korea, I figured, why an Asian or Japanese name? You're not Asian.
Aren't I? No. I don't think I am. No, I have a history of using Japanese names. When I grew up in the 90s, Japan was the big new thing. Everyone thought that Japan was going to overtake the US until they screwed up their banking. And basically, you had this culture that was part of everything I did. I grew up with manga. I grew up with martial arts, both Chinese and Japanese styles. And I grew up in a world where I had my first girlfriend was sort of in and out of Japan working and all the rest. And it was just something that was part of me. And on top of that, I had a person in my life, Miyamoto, and he was one of my first trainers, and after my mother and father split up, acted as a father figure. So,
Yeah, so that's why I chose Japanese, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And remind us again about why Satoshi and why Nakamoto.
Tomasu Nakamoto was a philosopher who talked about truth. He wanted a world where he sort of looked at history and said, history's changing all the time. He actually wrote about money and merchant services and all the rest as well. He was, I guess, the Japanese equivalent of Adam Smith. But he really had a lot of ideas also about the mutability of history, going into how Buddhist scrolls in particular would change meaning over time. And he investigated and researched how the different Buddhist religions in India and China and Tokyo were very different because of the different stages where people had read the documents and the different meanings they'd seen them translating. And so we have this person who had, in a way, given up on ever being able to capture truth. He said, I can't see any way this would happen. And Nakamoto's problem was he couldn't solve how you capture truth in a way that won't change. And Satoshi means intelligent history, as well as a few other things that I like.
Ash, right?
Ash, yep.
Pokemon.
And it's Nakamoto's solution. We have something where we can record every change. As language changes, we record how. And algorithmically in the future, I'm hoping blockchain's still here 1,000 years from now in some form. And people will be able to analyze with computers all the changes to the language and get it right. So Satoshi is Nakamoto's solution solved.
So here's the main thing I want to do differently this time. People ask you, I know, lots of questions about the creation of Bitcoin and being Satoshi or not. One of the things that people have done for many years, if you follow the Bitcoin world, is try to scrutinize and read over and over early Satoshi writings, online posts, emails, anything written by Satoshi. They're all archived on websites online. So I'm going to ask you about a number of them. You guys want to hear about what he had to say about a number of them? I think that's a good idea. So let's start with this. The Bitcoin Genesis block, Coinbase parameter, it's in hex, but you included the text for the Times, January 3rd, 2009 newspaper headline. Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. Why? Why'd you put that in there?
Well, at the time I'd just finished my law degree. I was with Northumbria, did my Masters of Law, and I read British newspapers all the time, especially on weekends. So I'm one of these lazy people at the time who would lie in bed. Now my wife and I use a tablet. It's not paper anymore. But I would lie in there and read the weekend paper. The Times was one of those. And if you read the white paper, you'll see Merkel proposed a way of actually validating time and Usenet posts or a newspaper. These are both ways of proving that you hadn't pre-mined, that it didn't exist before this date, etc. So I needed a headline. The second part of that is, and I've shown Jimmy this, the other paper at the time...
I decided not to show it to you all. You can describe it, though.
It involves celebrities and BB and a whole lot of other things that...
John Travolta's son's death.
And John Travolta's son dead.
That's right.
And I didn't think putting in something like John Travolta's son dies at 16 or wham bam celebrity bareback would be really...
Not very Satoshi-like.
Yeah, I didn't think that would really set the message.
Right. So yeah, you chose this as the default.
So I chose that.
The better option.
I'd been reading, because my commercial law master's degree was in internet intermediaries, financial services. I'd been studying British banking for basically a few years in depth. And I read, if you go about it, our chancellor there, every week was in the news for 18 months. And he was talking about the same thing all the time. And it wasn't the big bad banks and all this stuff that people are talking about, the Occupy people and whatever else. Just never read past the headline. Chancellor Darling was going to undo what Margaret Thatcher did. He was threatening the banks if they didn't do what he said, if they didn't make unprofitable loans. I mean, you get into trouble. And how do you dig yourself out? You make less profitable loans. He threatened them. He said he would nationalize British banking again if they didn't make these loans that would never be repaid.
But a lot of people think Satoshi was trying to send a particular message about Bitcoin because of the specific choice of this headline in particular, about something about the banking system. Were you trying to send the world some message by choosing this headline?
The bit I liked about that was,
other than not having to refer to John Travolta's
government
death?
nationalizing business. I want business to actually work and fail on its own. Banks shouldn't be bailed out. They shouldn't get special privileges when they fail. When they succeed, bonuses, who cares? But when they fail, getting paid out and whatever else, no, I don't agree with that one.
All right. I see some nodding heads. Yes. All right. Let's talk about the white paper. You like to talk often about things in the white paper people either misunderstand or ignore or want to disregard. A critical part of it, of course, is the discussion of digital signatures. We begin in section 2. We define an electric coin as a chain of digital signatures. Each owner transfers the coin to the next by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner and adding these to the end of the chain. Why was it important for you to define a Bitcoin, as a chain of digital signatures?
So, in common law sort of parlance, also a few varieties of civil law and whatever else, unicitral rules allow digital signatures to act to transfer goods and services and to bind contracts. They're covered in law right now. There's laws...
international e-signature.
Exactly,
laws.
there's e-signature rules. So we have all these rules that legalize Bitcoin and act within the law. And I wrote a number of papers on this topic. They're out there, they've been published. I don't think anyone's ever read them other than myself and my supervisors. But I wrote papers on digital signatures and electronic contracts and whatever else. in between 2005 and 2008 detailing how something like this could work, how we could make electronic EDI, how we could actually have transfers of assets online and tokens that are sold online.
Okay. Next, proof of work. This is, of course, a topic of now constant debate within the broader cryptocurrency world about what is the best consensus system. There's a whole, of course, section about this in the white paper for Bitcoin. Why did you choose proof of work for Bitcoin? And why is it that you feel so strong about it compared to proof of stake or other models people are proposing today for other cryptocurrency platforms?
Well, proof of stake is by definition a security for a start. So there's a number of issues there. Effectively, people say it's not a security because there's no dividends. Facebook doesn't have dividends. Google doesn't have dividends. In fact, 40% of the Fortune 500 companies in America don't ever pay dividends, but they're still shares. So unfortunately, you can't say dividend makes it a security. That's not by definition how these things work. More than that, what people don't understand is you can tokenize tokens. So if I own 51% of a network like EOS, I can create a control token and then sell my other tokens. So my 51% can be controlled by 51%. And that 51% by 51%. And if you look at News Limited, the former Australian who moved over there, Mr. Murdoch, owns under 20%, I believe, at the moment of News Limited. Yet he has absolute control because he owns 20% through one company and another company and another company. But he has like 5% News Limited holdings in a company that owns and controls 20%. So he controls a company that controls a company, etc. And the same thing happens in proof of stake as with companies. You can actually go down and create levels so that one person with one share can control 1 billion shares in proof of stake. Proof of work, on the other hand, is different. You have to actually invest. It's like a peacock's tail. People talk in evolutionary game theory about why would a peacock have this big tail that makes it really hard to basically do anything? It's very simple. Because if it survives, the female knows without any doubt, this guy is really strong. If he can actually move around without getting eaten with that bloody long tail there, God, I want to mate with him. It's the same thing with proof of work. If I can burn all this stuff doing totally useless work to show how much I trust this network and I can throw stuff away, I obviously really believe in proof of work. I believe in Bitcoin. I'm going to really validate these transactions because that stuff I've thrown away is the same as the peacock being eaten if I make an invalid choice. If I don't validate that block properly, I'm the peacock that's been eaten.
Is that why you have all those big feathers in your house?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I just like dancing around with a fan.
Yes, I've seen that. All right.
You wish.
So critics often, question this whole concept of the proof of work system and the possibility of competing chains. Did you contemplate the possibility of competing chains when you were designing the system? And what would be the effect of an attacking chain as you designed the system?
They're two different things. So yes, I thought about competing chains, and I thought it was. I actually commented back when I was using the Satoshi username, and I said how it would be a really silly idea. Unfortunately, no one ever seemed to listen to me. But really, it's like having two internets. It's like having lots of private internets, like we had in the 90s. IBM and Novell and everyone ran around making internets galore. And it was totally useless. And all those companies basically took a big barrel of money and threw it into a incinerator and got charged for the privilege of doing that. That's effectively what private blockchains are too. You're creating something that's going to be totally unconnected to the rest of the world and useless, and it's a legacy system that you're going to have to pay IBM huge amounts of money forever for. Actually, that's their business model, isn't it? They've been doing that for years.
All right, let's move on. So this was written in Bitcoin Talk. It's one of the postings.
Yes.
Yes, I guess that's August 7th, 2010. Do you remember this?
I do.
Okay, proof of work has the nice property that it can be relayed through untrusted middlemen. We don't have to worry about a chain of custody of communication. It doesn't matter who tells you a longest chain. The proof of work speaks for itself. What was the point you were trying to make here?
No one seemed to get it, even when I talked to Adam Back before Bitcoin was released. He never got, you don't run proof of work on every machine. Some people specialize. Some people run big server farms. Some people form in the lowest cost power areas and mine all these tokens. They put the work in and then they can sell it. Now, the concept with RPow and Adam Back's email server sort of spam thing that never really took off was you try and make everyone a techno geek and make them run proof of work first. Why? You invest the same way by buying goods and services. I know Gandhi came out with this idea in India and said, we're all going to make our own cloth. I don't want to make my own cloth. I don't want my wife's fingers sort of red and blistered all the time. I want to be able to earn money the most effective way I can, and someone who's really good at running hashing, I'll pay them for it. And proof of work doesn't require any trust in middlemen or anything like that. I know that token's there. I can validate it myself. That's what it means. It means instead of having these failed things going back to Aurora et al. 2001, where you fail by everyone having to run their own little proof of work algorithm on their own machine. You know, the stuff that's been tried since the 90s.
You sure like to talk about the
outsource
1990s a lot.
I'm old.
Have you noticed that? Every other phrase, in the 90s.
Whatever. Anyway, so rather than everyone doing this in this little sort of techno-communist world where we're all going to do the same thing, I'm a capitalist. I like buying goods and services. I like actually going out there, and I used to be a chef, but I go to restaurants and don't cook my meal, I buy it. So at the end of the day, I don't want to have to run all my own hash at home to validate every one of my transactions. I have a market, and that sets the rate, and I know exactly how much I need to buy. Why? Because everyone in a market bids.
All right, this is an important one. I quote it all the time. And you wrote in Bitcoin Talk on June 17th, 2010, this very famous and well-quoted post. The nature of Bitcoin is such that once version 0.1 was released, the core design was set in stone for the rest of its lifetime. And then it goes on, because of that, I wanted to design it to support every possible transaction I could think of. All right. This is an important one. It's a very important part of our philosophy in SV.
It is. I wanted to make something that would enable anyone who had any wacky idea to try it, no matter how insanely stupid. Well, that's what people have been telling me I've been doing for years, so I figured everyone else would want to do that. And quite simply, if you change things, you have to keep working on it, and you have to keep modeling and keep altering. And I worked way back in the 90s again. I was a Novell engineer for a CNE for a while. It was horrible. It was a great sort of that people kept throwing money at you because Novell changed the damn protocol all the time. Every year we had to redeploy things in businesses, and it cost them huge amounts of money and nothing ever got done. So what ended up happening was no one ever put anything or built anything on Novell. They kept it on their old COBOL machines, their AS400s and everything like that, because they were stable. And the banks stayed on this old crap and didn't build, but put stuff in the corner to make it look like they were innovative. If Novell had settled on a protocol and decided to keep running it, we'd probably be on IPX and not IP today.
You've talked about this as well publicly. Why was it important for you to say that a protocol had to be stable to support a digital currency system?
You can't have money that's going to change. You can't have a system where you hold something for your kids and you want to invest, and then it's not going to be valid a year later, or 2 years later, or 10 years later. You need money to be there as long as it needs to be there. If you want to invest now in something, it needs to be valid. If you want to buy a home, people take out 40-year mortgages right now. 40-year mortgages have to be valid for more than 40 years. If you change the protocol halfway through that, you don't want to go through lawyers and re-signing and everything like that. You just want it to work.
So, what did you really think were all of the different possible use cases of Bitcoin and its blockchain and the network when you created Bitcoin? Was it payment usage and what else? Did you really think it had 1,000 other plus uses?
Oh, 1,000's thinking too small. I want everything.
What does that mean, everything? You thought of it.
I mean everything. I want Internet of Things. I want it to be controlled and managed on a blockchain. I want logging on a blockchain. I want to know that when someone logs into my SSH server and tries to go in as root, if they're successful, they cannot delete that record, ever. I want to set up a Kerberos token so that when I go into my work server, it's recorded forever. I want, when someone's hacked my email, which they've done in the past, a record of who did it forever. I want to be able to send a token out to the blockchain and then another device that no one knows the IP address to act and do things. I want cameras recording to the blockchain. I want music streamed through the blockchain. I want timing systems. I want calculations bought and sold. Not hiring the way we do with AWS, a machine. Hiring computation. No one in business cares about a machine. They care about the result. If I want something computed, I care. I don't care about the machine. I get the machine because we have shitty security and I don't trust anyone else to be on my machine. Full stop. But if I have private calculations where the server that I'm running the calculation on doesn't even know what the hell it's calculating, I don't care anymore about owning a machine. I just get the result.
Can you give us an example of something you feature or something you put into the original protocol, version 0.1, that you foresaw could be used for uses beyond the payment usage, the electronic cash usage of Bitcoin, that people don't realize?
So, logging into servers, unlocking your car door, giving someone the rights or privileges to access and use something. Being able to set up an Airbnb with an electronic lock where you can flick the access over to someone as you will. Where, because we don't care about transaction size, when the cleaner gets there and I see the cleaner in my camera, I can now flick a little token across which opens my door and allows her to get access to the areas in the house she needs. Where people can buy electricity, kilowatt by kilowatt.
What in the original client software and protocol were you intending to be used for that, those kinds of uses?
In the original software, I tried making a really, really horrible poker client. And I also had a peer marketplace, which was like a really, really dumb version of eBay. I can't say it was pretty at all.
Yeah.
In the poker,
I've seen the poker thing. It was not pretty.
Yeah, I know. I work with people who've been in the gambling industry, and they tell me it's the ugliest ever Texas Hold'em game invented in human history. But I'm not a graphic designer. I'm sorry.
Let's talk about scalability, because this is obviously the key issue that's caused, all of the infighting for so many years in the Bitcoin world. So this famous email from Satoshi Nakamoto, April 12th, 2009, to Mike Hearn, where you write, there's only one global chain. The existing Visa credit card network processes about 15 million internet purchases per day worldwide. Bitcoin can already scale much larger than that with existing hardware for a fraction of the cost. It never really hits a scale ceiling.
Only when you try and make it run on every single Raspberry Pi in the world, that's when you have problems. But if you allow professionalization, if you allow people to actually do what the design was, which is outsourcing proof of work calculation and allowing the verification to be the center of the network, then you can start SPV, simplified payment verification. The thing that no one's got in these 10 years. It's really, really simple. I keep a transaction and then I give it to Jimmy when I want to give it to him as well. And he can validate both. And that hash header is really small. I only need 10 meg or so, and I can keep all the hashes, and I can see any sort of transactions that are not valid, because the miners are incentivized to find invalid ones. And now, Jimmy can look not at the blockchain, he can take my input transaction, and he can hash it. And he finds the hash on the blockchain, and he knows he's safe. He doesn't need to do any more checking. Everyone doesn't need to check everything. This level of paranoia is insane.
Why were you emailing with Mike Hearn at this time?
Mike back then was interested in Bitcoin because he'd been working at Google, and he was working on some of the payment systems. Now, all of the payment systems, like Google wanted to do micropayments and all the rest, but their system, I think they could get it down to like 15, 20 cents, or have it all internal and occasionally still have to pay 1% to credit card companies and all this stuff. So my claims that I thought I could get 1/100th of a cent or less, and even smaller eventually, sort of interested him.
So you mentioned server farms. This is another often quoted mailing list post from November of 2008, which a lot of people, including me, point to say you envisioned that the network would be run by big server farms, not Raspberry Pis. I know you
It will always end on server farms.
Yes.
Because Section 5 of the white paper defines a node. Okay. A miner is a node. If you're not mining, you're not a node. Because nodes create blocks. Nodes validate transactions. Nodes do proof of work. Raspberry Pis don't do that, so they're not nodes. But let's have a little thought experiment here. It's very simple. ProgPower works. We've made this wonderful new Ethereum algorithm, and it only runs on GPUs. No one can ever, which is BS anyway, ever get an ASIC that will do this. Or they can switch it or whatever else. I can now go, ha-ha, I'm extra smart and I'm a businessman. Wouldn't it be more efficient if I get a whole lot of NVIDIA K80s and put them in specialized server equipment and run up a huge server farm of GPUs? I can have one person manage 120 machines, each machine having 16 to 24 GPUs in it, and I can basically get power at half the rate of these home users, and I can start out competing them. Those poor little home users, unless they're stealing power from mum, will now have to compete with me. And I can do it at a quarter of the cost and probably 8 times the profitability. Then someone else will go, oh, bugger, this guy's making a shitload of profit. I'm going to do that too. And very soon, you find a whole lot of CPU farms and GPU farms that are running machines, like Google and AWS do now, really efficiently. And all the home users disappear.
All right. Let's talk about SPV. Since there's, of course, a section about this in the white paper itself, but you wrote on Bitcoin Talk about it as well with this post saying the design outlines a lightweight client that does not need the full blockchain. The lightweight client can send and receive transactions. It just can't generate blocks, etc. And then you mentioned the lightweight client is not yet implemented. For now, everyone just runs a full network node. But you, as you were just talking about, always envisioned everyone would not be running a full network node.
Exactly. When I said this, I thought it was very clear. Obviously, everything I say is never, ever clear. And when I made that comment about being better at math and code than actually explaining anything, I accept that. I'm sorry. I'll just give up and buy everyone a dictionary.
The Craig Dictionary.
Yeah. But
yes, the Craig Dictionary.
The simple thing is, if there's a transaction in a block, it's been validated by miners. I now know that that transaction is valid. Not because I checked it, because it's in the blockchain. My checking it does nothing. I can put on a hat and I can run around getting really upset and angry because I don't like that transaction, and I can burn my hat later and I can jump up and down, and it means nothing. If you don't mine, you don't verify. But what I can do at home is I can look at that transaction that's being given to me, and I can validate that it is still unspent on the blockchain. I can hash that transaction. My computer does that. It's a nice simple process. And I can check the hash. I can check that it's a valid UTXO and it hasn't been spent. I know now that that transaction is a valid input. I can look at the transaction I've been handed and say that this input is valid for this thing I've been paid. And I can say, yes, I've been paid correctly. That's what peer is. This Bitcoin peer-to-peer. Not Bitcoin is person, peer, to miner to peer. It's not a peer-to-miner network to peer system. It is a peer-to-peer system. I'm obviously not making that clear enough.
Apparently not until right now. No. I know you have tried to make that clear to many people, and I think they just don't want to hear it, or they want to ignore the peer-to-peer part. So you're telling us that you specifically conceived of the simplified payment verification lightweight client approach as a solution to enable the network to grow to big, massive blocks, but not have everyone have to run a full node.
Exactly. Right now, you can download the entire header with only 10 megabytes or so. If you take a selfie, it's probably 20 megabytes. Honestly, if we're transmitting all these photos, and we've had hundreds of blockchains obviously downloaded in SPV format while I've been walking around, because I've seen many photos being taken and posted and whatever else. You just update your 10 meg worth of data, and you don't even have to do it all at once. You take a little tiny extra bit every now and again. So it's enough that some poor person in central Namibia can actually just trickle this thing down. And now they can have this input transaction and validate that, not download the whole blockchain via satellite. I have my transaction, I know it's valid, it's there, hashed immutably in the blockchain. Because if it's not valid and it's not in the blockchain, you're not going to take it. But if You go, I don't like that transaction in the blockchain, and you're not a miner. Who cares? You can't do anything.
Let's talk about micropayments, since that's a big topic in the BSV ecosystem. Now, we've heard a lot about it as a key characteristic of BSV uniquely. And there's this cryptography mailing list post where there's some indirect reference to it, which is once Bitcoin gets bootstrapped, there are so many applications. If you could effortlessly pay a few cents to a website as easily as dropping coins in a vending machine. Why did you write that, and why that particular example?
Well, one of the main things that Bitcoin was designed to solve is micropayments. And everyone runs around saying, Satoshi said Bitcoin's not good for micropayments, and they misread everything. In a Bitcoin Talk forum post, someone was talking about sending 100 millionth of a Bitcoin to a website. And I made the comment that Bitcoin's not ready for sending transactions that small yet. Basically, I then said a few things down in my typical way. Oh, I forgot to tell you, which no one ever reads, when it professionalizes, it will be. Right now, it's good for small payments around the few cents or even fraction of a cent level, but not the billionth of a cent. There's a difference. Micropayments, even right now, people talk about micropayments as a cent or half a cent. That's valid. We can do that with Bitcoin easily. It will take time to get to a stage without putting in, say, payment channels to have billionth of a cent transactions. I'm sorry, I didn't envision in day one that we would have people wanting to have a billionth of a cent transaction.
Well,
I didn't think of everything.
All right. Okay, let's move and
I actually thought the cost of actually using your computer to send the transaction would be more than a billionth of a cent, but
this is an important post to look at. This is a screen capture from Bitcoin Talk on December 5th, 2010. And this is about WikiLeaks. All right? Where someone posted, basically, bring it on. Let's encourage WikiLeaks to use Bitcoins, and I'm willing to face any risk or fallout from that act. R. Horning. And then there was a response where you say, no, don't bring it on. And you make an appeal to WikiLeaks not to try to use Bitcoin. So tell us what was going on in your head here.
I really don't like WikiLeaks, and I don't like Mr. Assange. Not because releasing information, but because of how he did it. WikiLeaks, there were a lot of people in WikiLeaks who wanted to responsibly disclose information. And Assange dumped it. He put people at risk. I don't care whether you like war or not. No one likes war. Well, only there are idiots. But the reality...
You're getting a doctorate in it right now. Yeah.
There are people who, whether you like it or not, have their lives on the line.
Yes.
And when you dump information that puts them at risk, you're not helping anyone. There's disclosure and there's responsible disclosure. Risking soldiers' lives so that you can be famous is fucking evil. There's no other way to put it. It's fucking evil.
But you're also concerned, at the end of this post, that if WikiLeaks would start using Bitcoin at the time, that it might inhibit the growth of Bitcoin and destroy it because it was in its infancy, as you write there.
Correct. So after Mr. Assange had dumped all of these operational documents and got himself into a lot of trouble, the US government talked about freezing a whole lot of different things. They stopped PayPal, they stopped Visa, and whatever else. So WikiLeaks came under attack. I didn't want Bitcoin to be the back door to helping Mr. Assange avoid the US government. There are other ways of doing things. And I'm sorry, I don't want people to make a target out of something that was still nascent and growing because they thought it would be fun. I put a lot of work into creating this network. My family know how little time I have and how much I sacrifice for this. It's taken a lot to get to where we are in Bitcoin, and I didn't want it killed then, and it could have been. This BS, and there's no other thing for it, of the government can't stop Bitcoin. It can stop it like that. Not that you can hear that, but but it can. There are things called worldwide freezing orders. Liberty Reserve is a cryptocurrency. Was. 42 countries. That's how dispersed all of this was. 42 countries acted simultaneously to take down Liberty Reserve. If a court order applied to miners in 4 countries, Bitcoin would end. Right now, the government, if they see Bitcoin as an anonymous criminal organization, it will die, even today. I don't want Bitcoin to die. I don't want it funding terror. I don't want it helping people who are drug dealers. I want an honest system. I built it to be an honest system. So, at the end of the day, helping someone who has just dumped things that potentially led to deaths because he thought that the media would give him more accolades, no thank you.
I don't remember, but were there responses to this, or did you have any other communications about trying to stop WikiLeaks that you could talk about?
No, not a lot. I mean, there are a few private conversations and a couple other bits and pieces, but at this stage I was rather disillusioned. Earlier that year, the first commercial application on Bitcoin after all my, hey, let's build stuff, even vending machines, you name it, the first commercial application came out. A heroin store. Yay! Here I am pushing for anything to vending machines, to selling digital Beanie Babies, to whatever else, and what do people come up with? A heroin store. Not even pot. I mean,
Heroin.
Honestly, pot is legal in lots of places, but they can't get banking. It would have been sensible. We could have legally done, hey, let's sell pot. I mean, I wouldn't have cared. But no, hey, heroin, great, yeah.
How did that make you feel when you learned that?
So, my past in auditing, forensics, and whatever else, I worked back in the day with one of the guys who helped me with some of the network stuff, Ignatius, taking down child pornography rings. We analyzed network connectivity, chat logs, and everything like that. And there are still papers out there where I have network models and everything like this, so that we could find pedophiles, child groomers, etc. Then some of those techniques were used in basically tracking money. So I worked with a guy over in Britain for a while, and we helped track money through the SWIFT network. So money coming out of Russia, criminal empires sort of selling drugs, etc., and building network models for all this. I worked... I know the peer-to-peer television and pay sort of distribution stuffs for media very well because I'm one of the guys who did all the takedowns. Sorry. I built some of the code that helped take down the Tor networks. Sorry. But at the end of the day, I'd spent years working on software and systems to help track monetary movements of criminal organizations through SWIFT and everything like this. And I just thought everything I was doing was just burnt. I just created a system that potentially ruined my whole life's work.
And then, how did you feel when you found out about Silk Road?
That's basically what became of the heroin store. So the initial sort of stuff started with him selling mushrooms, and then became heroin, and then
worse things, right?
Then guns, because people need to defend themselves with a rocket launcher, and then he got into strychnine and cyanide and a whole lot of things because, you might want to really kill rats. I mean, really? I mean, these little buggers, rat poison doesn't do it well, so you need concentrated strychnine, trust me.
Is that why Satoshi went away?
Yes. Unfortunately, at that point, I was incredibly disillusioned. I'd been going through a lot. I was probably the dumbest Bitcoiner in 2009 because I actually claimed all my IP and everything like that on tax, which, of course, I spent $1.1 million and claimed it.
And developing this whole system.
And the tax office comes up and says, it's not an enterprise, it's a hobby. No one in their right mind would spend $1 million on something you can buy for cents. So you're either the stupidest person on earth or this is some sort of scam, so you're not claiming that any of that IP. Go away.
And I have heard you talk about this. We've had some private conversations about this, that you felt at the time a great sense of, in a bad way, responsibility for what would be illegal uses you discovered of Bitcoin early in its life.
Correct.
Why did you feel so personally responsible when it wasn't you that was running those marketplaces or engaging in the illegal transactions?
I designed Bitcoin to have an immutable audit trail, something that no one would ever get away from. And if it worked, I figured this would be the first time that there's no more Enrons, there's no more Bernie Madoffs, there's no more Nigerian prince scams, there's no more large-scale drug things. People won't be selling women into prostitution because there'll be records for everything. I thought at the time I'd invented something that was different to eGold, that was different to DigiCash, that was different to every other attempt to make a currency because it had tracing. Having done a master's in law and concentrating on financial services, the bit everyone ignores is one of the critical components of money is traceability. Everyone ignores that unless they're a lawyer. So the next thing I find is people are starting this, and I thought they were actually finding ways of making it anonymous, and they might get away with convincing the government and everything that Silk Road can work. And it's my technology. I effectively gave it birth. I created it. I dropped it there. So Silk Road didn't make the world safer. People love to say how it got drug dealers off the street or whatever. It opened up fentanyl markets in the US. It had bad sales with bad reputations. There are many people died because of Silk Road. For every so-called person saved, that they like to say, for every drug dealer now safe off the street and able to work from home in security, 6 people died. I'm not making up those figures. Kids died from bad ecstasy. They had overdoses. People died because of fentanyl. It is a horrible, evil drug. Mixed with heroin, it is one of the most potent, awful things ever invented by humankind. And it is an epidemic because of my invention. It got into the US because people sent it via mail, because they sold it over the internet from China. And it started because of me.
Well, I'm going to tell you, my friend, it's not your fault. We have a room full of people who believe a lot in the Satoshi vision. So let me close with this question. You just talked about what you didn't want Bitcoin to be used for and why you went away from it. Now that you're back and we have BSV to reclaim the Satoshi vision, what do you want people, developers, businesses to build with Bitcoin?
I want you to start realizing that you can save data, that you can create records, that you can communicate with people now trustlessly, that you can build reputations online, that fraud, one of the worst things that divides and sucks away society, can be minimized. Right now, around 15 to 20% of everything created is wasted because of frauds and crime. And I'm not exaggerating on those figures. It includes all the things we do to stop them. All the terrible auditors like me who used to come around and annoy the buggery out of everyone as I went through the books and stopped people doing real work. And that's what auditors do. But we were needed. So we'd pull people off their jobs, make them go through all the accounts, sit down with all the IT staff, and they weren't working when I was there. I want to see Bitcoin enable people to keep working while we look at the audit logs so that the auditors don't even need to ever come into the organization. What I want to see is the Ernst & Youngs and the BDOs not be policemen. I want to see them give advice. I want to see consultants not tell you what you did wrong, but help you do it right. Be proactive, because they know they can have everything checked by a computer. I used to write CATS and DAT software, so computer-aided audit techniques and whatever else. So Benford's Law was one of the things we talked about, but also neural networks to try and start looking for fraud. So I actually approached Google, interestingly, in 2007 about neural networks for all this, and now Google hires anyone and their dog who can spell neural networks. But I actually got told by Google, neural networks will never get anywhere, they can't scale, go away. So I've been told for a long time that none of my technology will ever scale. But that's a different story. But when we get rid of fraud and crime, and it will never go away totally, don't get me wrong there, but if we economically incentivize it so that 15 to 20% cost is now 1.5%. Think what that means for society. We're in a world of 2% growth. Imagine if suddenly 15% magically appears. What the hell will that be like? I like to think it's actually going to be good.
You saw a lot of the next generation of developers at this conference, building on your creation, the original design coming back as you intended. What do you think of them?
I think it's great. I mean, when you look at people starting to understand the concept of peer, that's what this is about. It's not we have a centralized blockchain and everyone runs a node because we're all drones. It's now we do our own business and we interact with other people, people who can be anywhere on earth earning money because they get paid. They can earn based on what their skill set is. They can be in Pakistan, they can be in Kenya, They can be anywhere on earth. And if they have the skills and they learn the skills, and when you add things like, Khan Academy and whatever else, and you allow people to start building the knowledge to do this, and you start saving reputation on chain, and you allow people to actually interact, then maybe we'll forget this silly idea that everything's about manufacturing in America or something like that, and realize service industries, code, math, these are actually all exportable industries too. And we can build a world that grows.
Yeah. And finally, one of your key partners along this phase of the journey has been Calvin Ayre.
Yes.
And what would you say to him?
Thanks for putting up with me. I met Kelvin years ago, and Kelvin's been a mentor. I haven't always been the best leader or boss or anything like that. And I'll say to my staff and those working with me, thank you for putting up with me and helping develop me and helping me be there and learn and not throwing your hands up and walking out as I've had my little not quite being able to explain things tantrums. The only way to put it.
Yes.
And thank you, Kelvin, for actually teaching me how to be a better leader and learn to actually be a businessman and not just a mathematician and a coder and all that stuff, because it doesn't matter how well you code. If you can't interact with people, then you're screwed.
And I know it's hard for you.
I know.
All right, on that note, I'm going to wrap this up and say thank you again. You stay here. Yeah.